Welcome to my Autumn in the Trees transparent watercolor tutorial. This is a narrated step-by-step tutorial and is the companion video to my Autumn in the Trees transparent watercolor demonstration, which is set to music at 3x speed. In this tutorial, I will walk through the development of this painting and review the materials and palette that I used to accomplish this. Before I begin to paint, I've made a decision to mask off some of the linear branch shapes. To do this, I'll use a fine line masking fluid pen similar to this one. Throughout the painting process, you'll see me using a fine mist sprayer to diffuse the paint and soften edges. I like to use this Atelier brand. It has a very fine mist, and I've used it with achieving very good results. These are the paint brushes that I use for this painting. Starting from the bottom, a silver black velvet jumbo round small. It's a very soft, nice wash brush. In the middle is a black gold quill series 311. It's not a small brush, but it comes with a very fine point and it's very good for detail work. Then above is Escoda Reserva, is a series of brushes. They're very nice brushes and they're a good all-around general purpose brush. Now I'll do a quick review of the palette that I used to accomplish this painting. This is my palette. It has 30 colors. There's 8 to 10 that I use most often. And the paintings that I use for this painting are indicated in this slide. And starting at the top, I use Royal Blue, Mauve, Quinacridone Coral, Pyrrole Red, Quinacridone Gold, Yellow Ochre, and Sap Green. The photo on the right is where the inspiration for this painting came from. As you can tell, I made the decision to take a painterly approach and try to make a piece of art. I didn't just try and copy the photograph. This is the sketch that I drew on my work surface before I began painting. I'm going to begin to apply the masking fluid. At the beginning of my video, I showed a fine line masking fluid pen. I quite frequently use that, and when I'm going to be putting a larger volume of masking fluid down, I use this type of an applicator. It's just a plastic bottle that you can buy on your own and fill it up with any kind of liquid mask that you prefer to use. This is a fairly thick area, so I apply a bead of masking fluid, then I take this, it's called a color shaper, which basically has a shaped rubber tip on it, and it helps spread the masking fluid evenly over the area that you're trying to cover, and it's a little bit more economical. You don't waste as much masking fluid this way. You can put a bead down and then push it around with a rubber tip on the color shaper. Here I'm putting the final bits of masking fluid down. I'm just moving around the composition, indicating where there might be some little stems from leaves or branches or twigs. Now I'm going to take a jar of masking fluid with a toothbrush. I'm going to dip the toothbrush in the masking fluid and I'm just going to splatter it a little bit in various areas of the composition, just to give me a textural quality. And this is how it appears once it's dry. And now I'm ready to paint. I'm going to come in just applying some color, various areas of the composition. This will become my base wash that I use to help map the color scheme that I'm going to use for this painting. Normally when I start with this wash, this kind of a wash, I'm using a bigger brush, but I want to be careful here to try and keep some of the hard edges of the leaf shapes and not lose those too early. So to do that, I'm using a little bit of a smaller brush where I can be more precise with my application of paint. The color that I'm applying right now is a combination of royal blue and alizarin crimson. This color is a combination of quinacridone and coral and quinacridone and gold. Two colors that I really like. Quinacridone and gold is Daniel Smith's formula number 49, which they've just made their last batch, and I'm hoping that the future mixture is as good as the current one. This green is a combination of sap green with pyrrole red. It's a mixture I like to use a lot. I like the sap green, and I use the pyrrole red to take the rawness off the green, make it look more natural, and the more red I add, the more it drives it towards a neutral color. But I use it in a lot of my paintings, that color combination, as do I use the quinacridone gold and quinacridone coral. The combination of the quinacridone gold and coral to me makes a nice burnt sienna type color that has more character than what you get out of the tube. After I applied touches of color, I've come in with a spray bottle and soften the edges and diffuse that color to more of a wash. And this will become the color roadmap that I use as I develop this composition. It'll change some, but in general, when I lay down my initial wash, it becomes the map that I use to the colors that I use for the rest of the painting. And one of the things you have to be aware of when you're working in watercolor is controlling that bead of water that I'm touching on with the brush right now. If you take a damp brush and go in, it'll pick that bead up when you want to. There's times when you use that bead to lead a wash down the paper, but you have to be aware of that, because if you just let it sit there and dry, it's going to give you blossoms in unwanted areas. As certain areas of the paper start to dry ahead of the others, you can get unwanted effects that will result because of that. So you need to be aware of that, but learn to watch and make sure you don't let that water pool too long unless you plan to do something with it. Now I'm starting to come in with darker values. I normally start in the area that I want my center of interest. And to come up with a center of interest, I use the rule of thirds, and I won't go into detail here, but if you look it up on the internet, the rule of thirds, it gives some guidelines for coming up with a center of interest. And when you're doing a painting, if you don't have a good value contrast and good plan for your how you're going to use your values, whether it be white, light, middle value, or dark values, that's one of the reasons that paintings often fall short of what they're capable could actually be, because they don't have a good value structure. You can be off on your color, but if you have good use of your values, it can really still make a strong painting. Here I've done a color change, and I'm starting to work a middle value with a mixture of quinacridone coral and quinacridone gold. And I'm going to be working in this middle value quite a bit here as I start to establish the major shapes of this composition. So most of this brushwork so far has been working in negative space. So rather than focus on what's going on in the interior edges of, say, the tree shapes, I'm focused more on what's going on between the exterior edges of the tree shapes. We tend to paint positively and work on positive things. When we paint, we think of trees as a positive image, which just comes natural to us, and we don't tend to think of what's going on between trees. And just by painting the space between them, you can start to actually develop the shape of the tree or the leaves themselves without even touching them. More often than not, when we're going to paint a tree, the first place we're going to put a brush is on the tree trunk. And right now I'm starting to establish these tree shapes and leaf shapes, but I've really yet to put a brush onto the surface of any of those objects. And I tend to refer to things as shapes because everything's a shape. You need to start looking at things differently and don't think of things as an object such as a leaf or a tree or a branch. It's a linear shape, or it's a small shape or a large shape, a dark shape. And yeah, we know it's a leaf, but to come up with good design and good composition, you really need to start thinking shapes. So I've done quite a bit of negative painting, and now right here I'm starting to apply a wash to a positive shape. So here I have a leafy shape, and I want to have a darker value, it's really a middle value, against that light background. So I alternate throughout the composition, light against dark, dark against light. Now here I'm putting a dark green tone or a middle value green tone underneath that lighter leaf shape, and I'm just creating a darker leaf shape here with a different color just to help make that other leaf shape come forward. So that green between the two leaf shapes make both those start to stand out, working in negative space there. Here again, I'm suggesting a green tone, a middle value, and it's right against the edge of that tree trunk, so it helps reinforce that there's an edge of that tree trunk there without actually painting on the tree. Same with the leaf that I'm working right now. That darker green shape next to the lighter leafy shape makes it stand out more, and it starts to build depth in the composition. Here I've started to use my darkest value yet in the composition, and one of the things you can do to help keep your value scale in perspective is to have one that you do as a scale, do a grayscale to use as a tool, and that could be as simple as having a white, a light, a middle value, and a dark value painted on a piece of paper that gives you your range of what's really a dark, because sometimes you think you're at a very dark value in your composition, and really it's a middle value. But if you have that little tool, little value scale that you can use and compare to your painting, it really tells you, are you really at a middle value, or you're one of your darkest darks. So I need to start establishing some darker shapes, some larger, darker shapes. And that's what I'm doing here with a dark valued mixture of royal blue and alizarin crimson. Everything can't be the same size in a composition. You need to vary the sizes of your leaves, the size of your tree trunks. You want to vary the space between your tree trunks. You don't want them all equally spaced. You want them to appear different levels of completion or height, and in this situation you can't see the tops or the bottom of these trees, but to have all three of them, you want to avoid having all three of them go from top to the bottom of the paper and interrupt them in different spots so that they're not, again, not all the same length in that respect. So one of the things I'm going to be doing here is, as this painting develops, I'll try and take the dark value behind these positive leafy shapes and tree shapes to suggest that there's a larger dark valued shape behind there. You don't see it all as one shape. It's broken up into little pieces, but it ties together visually the eye to appear as though it's one dark shape in the background. I'm going to apply this warm wash. It's a mixture of quinacridone gold and a touch of yellow ochre and just a touch of quinacridone coral in it. But for the most part, it's 80% quinacridone gold. It's very warm tone, and you can see that I'm putting that on the positive shape of the tree, and that warm color helps bring that shape forward. But putting this wash over the entire composition starts to tie it together. I use the hairdryer frequently throughout my process when it's to a point that I can't work it anymore without making it muddy. I'll dry it, and I don't show that on the video, but I do dry that, and so I build up these layers, and I feel for me this combination of putting down layers of wash, diffusing it with a spray, coming in with wet on dry painting of very specific darker valued shapes. It gives a nice transition of color. It lets colors mingle without becoming muddy, and it keeps the painting fresh. And you can also use that spray to help create somewhat of a directional flow in your painting by putting a touch of color next to a hard edge and then spraying it away from that edge. It gives a flow of that color away from that edge and helps reinforce the edge, but gives a nice color harmony throughout the composition. This tone that I'm applying now is a combination of quinacridone coral and quinacridone gold, probably 70% quinacridone coral, but it gives a very rich burnt sienna-like color. It's a color I really like. It's a mixture I like. I like it much better than using burnt sienna out of the tube. Right now I'm trying to showcase this color a little bit, and it helps send forward some of those leaf shapes. And by painting around the edges, not 100%, you want lost and found edges, but I put this tone and these darker values around the edges of some of these shapes, and then spray away from it with that sprayer, or just use a wet brush, and it helps diffuse more color in the composition, and it helps better define some of those hard edges of the shapes. So now I'm applying some darker values to the this lower quadrant of the composition because it needs more definition. It's not going to be as fully developed as the top left quadrant where I want more of my center of interest, but I still need to find these shapes a little bit more and have a little more interest here. So that color I just put down has nothing to do with my photographic reference. I really haven't used that for much of this painting other than to put the initial drawing down. These tones I'm putting down here are because they're tones that I need to, that I feel to improve the composition. I wanted to bring out that shape of that leaf right there, that gold colored leaf. So to do that, I came in with that purple tone underneath and I softened it with a spray bottle. But my only reason for doing that is because design wise and compositionally I felt it was needed. It had nothing to do with my photographic reference. There are times when I'm trying to create an exact representation of the photograph and I approach it much differently. But for the most part, when I use a photographic reference, I have a tablet that's on a stand to my left as I paint. And most often when I want to use that reference and I look to it because I want to look at something, I have to wake the tablet up because it pretty much goes to sleep because I just don't use it that often. So now I've reached a point where I've decided it's time to take off the masking fluid that I put down. So I dried my painting thoroughly and I am using a rubber cement eraser to remove that masking, and it reveals the white linear shapes that I preserved, and it'll start to show the splattering effect where I hit it with a toothbrush, which gives me a textural quality that I wanted. I normally do this midway through the painting once I've established enough of a wash and tone across the whole composition, and I reach a point where I decide to take that off, and I don't want to wait to the very end because there are still washes and tones that I want to apply over some of these surfaces. I don't want to just have them all just as they were masked. Here I'm just continuing now that I've taken off the mask and revealed a little bit more of the shapes that I've preserved. I'm coming in and building up more layers as I did earlier in my process with some darker tones, starting to bring other shapes forward. So here I've got a darker gold tone and I'm just positioning it behind some of these other shapes to send that negative space back and to bring that positive shape of a leaf or branch forward. And some of these shapes, I pay attention to the direction of them, the size of them, the value of them, because when you put it down, when you put a brush stroke down, you want it to accomplish something, or there's no reason to do it. You don't want to just put down paint to put down paint. You want to put down a paint because you're trying to make a shape, or you're trying to get behind something and bring it forward, or create overlap, or just put a tone and take something down in value, or just a touch. Here's an instance where applying this darker tone underneath the top leaf brings it forward, and it helps send the one underneath it back a little bit. There's a gradation there, so you can make out the leaf, but you can tell that it's back in space, and that's all done just by putting glazes down and washes against edges. So my whole reason for putting this dark brush stroke here in this darker shape where I'm working with it is to just better define the edge of that tree. That's my only reason for putting that dark shape there. I'm going to diffuse it, but it's while I've softened it up and lightened it a bit, it still helps define the shape of that tree and bring it forward. And now this warm wash over the top of it, here I'm working on the positive surface of this within the interior edges of this tree, and I'm going to diffuse that color, but now that starts to really bring that trunk forward and give it the character as a tree trunk. Continue to build layers here of this gold tones on top of the branch and some other shapes, so it brings it more into the foreground, and it's a warmer color too, which helps that along. And I'm going to diffuse this a little bit with the sprayer to soften that up. But this is a process of continuing to layer and build values and make shapes as I develop the painting. Now what I'm doing, it's subtle, but it's something that I do in a lot of my paintings when I'm taking this approach. I get to a point where I have a lot of these darker values down and I've established a lot of these shapes. I take a flat brush, dampened, and a Kleenex, and I come in with a damp brush and I just do some lifting and dragging. And what I try to do is lift in a darker area, and I drag the color into a lighter area, so it starts to create that, suggest that linear shape by lifting off in the dark area and then dragging that tone across the lighter area. And it helps give some dimension to it and give some motion to it. I'll use this a lot in, say, floral paintings. Towards the end of my painting, I'll use this in combination with a rigger, and I'll use it to suggest some linear shapes and movement, and it helps kind of bring the painting alive a little bit. It's very subtle. And what I'll do after I've done this sometimes is I come in with some of my darker values and I position some darker tones and dark values beside these linear shapes that I've lifted off, and it just helps make them more defined, gives them better definition. You can see the approach I take is very repetitive. I continue this process of slowly building values and shapes and layers of color. It takes a bit of time, but to me it gives the result that I'm after. So that's another similar dark shape underneath another leaf. And one of the things I've done there is I've made it smaller than the other one. Again, try to keep shapes different sizes, different widths, lengths, heights, vary the value. Try and avoid sameness if you can. There's times when you want it, there's a place for it, but in generally when I'm laying in similar shapes like this, like right now I'm putting these very similar dark valued shapes. They're the same value, similar color, but I'm varying the direction they're pointing. I'm varying the shape of them. I want to avoid making them look like they were put down with a cookie cutter stamp. So I've done quite a bit here, mostly in the middle value. So now I'm going to come in with one of my darkest darks so far and start to really make some of these shapes pop and stand out. So this is a very dark mixture of royal blue and alizarin crimson for the most part. It's with very little water. It's wet, but it's very thick pigment and it's very dark. So as I apply this, you'll see it really starts to make some shapes stand out. It really starts to send some of the background pretty far in the back because it's such a dark value. And as I paint in these shapes, some of these shapes are already established, and I try and break my shapes up. You can see some of the light linear tones going across there. In my brush strokes, I'm not just filling up that one shape with a dark, I'm doing pieces of that shape. So it holds together, but it still has some interest in it. Often, if I have a dark value that I'm bringing like behind a shape, I'll start on one and then one edge and pick it up on the other edge. You can see right there, I picked it up on the between the branch and the tree trunk, and I picked it up again on the other end of the tree trunk, and the eye will complete that, and it knows that that's one shape, but it's behind other objects. So in essence, you help make the edges there more believable and the object more believable, and you let the eye complete make the connection for itself. Here again, I'm going to bring this a linear dark value behind these other shapes. So it's bringing those shapes forward, it's reinforcing the edge, and because it's such a linear shape and has direction to it, it's given some motions and some direction to what's going on in the painting. It's helping to lead the eye through the composition. Just those touches of color right there suggest that there's an edge that it's coming behind. And then the direction of that linear shape helps create some motion, helps lead the eye across the page. And now I'm doing a little bit more of the same here, but I've changed my color, so I'm using a darkened mixture of quinacridone coral, quinacridone gold, with a touch of royal blue in it to darken it up a bit. I've decided I want a little bit of this sienna color in here, so I'm going to bring in this kind of rich mixture of quinacridone gold and quinacridone coral and lay down a few washes to make some larger shapes of this color. I'm working this color across the composition. Again, I wanted to bring a little bit more of this tone, this color into the composition. The other thing it's doing is help me establish a warm color dominance. You don't want your warm and cool battling each other. You want to have an equal amount of cool and warm color. You need to establish, just like with shapes and values, you need to establish a dominance in terms of your color. So in this composition, I'm trying to keep this towards a warm color dominance, and just applying this wash helps that along. Now I'm going to start to bring some dark valued accents throughout the composition. This linear shape that I'm putting in here, you can see me picking it up and going behind objects and picking it up on the other edge. And that eye completes that shape and takes you along through the other edge of that tree, and it breaks up the direction somewhat of some of those other linear shapes that are coming from your left to your right. And I'll continue to put some of these dark accents across the composition, just touches of color, touches of dark value that help make some of those areas pop a little bit more. Now I'm coming in with my rigger brush. I didn't show this brush as one that I used in the opening of this video, but it's just a general purpose rigger brush, and I apply a dark value, and I come in towards the end of my painting process and just use this to give some accents across the painting. It helps build a little bit of activity, a little motion. It goes over the top of shapes and underneath other shapes, and just helps create more interest. So I'll do this using this purple tone. I'll bring in a little bit of the orange tone, darker values. So I'm nearing the end of this painting. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you're getting value out of it. I've tried to set my videos up as a 2-video series where you can have your choice of watching the step-by-step narrated tutorial, or just watch it uninterrupted as a sped-up demonstration. The feedback I've had so far that the two work in tandem pretty well. You can watch the narrated video and understand how I developed the painting, and then you can just sit back and watch it uninterrupted all come together, sped up to help with the economy of time, because I know that's precious for all of us. So that's my painting Autumn in the Trees. Thanks for watching and good luck with your painting.